Welcome to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk.
Hey everyone, it's Jenny Lisk, and this is episode 136 of the Widowed Parent Podcast. So I am really glad to be back. It's late April 2023, and I actually have not posted an episode since late February, which is terrible, and I do apologize for that. I've had a few things going on here. First of all, I had shoulder surgery, which actually is still dealing with, rehabbing from that. Then, as soon as I started to get back to work, I landed back in bed with COVID. And then, as soon as that was wrapping up, I actually got a rat infestation in my garage. And since my office and podcast studio is connected to my garage, that means I had a problem here too, and that means that I didn't have access to my equipment. So it's been a tricky couple of months here, but I'm very glad to be back and sharing today's episode with you guys. I had a really terrific discussion with Heidi Carson for this episode, and I do thank her for her patience. It's been a little while since we talked, but I think you guys will really look forward to hearing our discussion. Heidi's a fellow widowed parent. She lost her husband, Chad, when their kids were just 12 and 14. And it was due to some complications related to a rare telomere disease, which he had. And Heidi tells us more about that in our discussion. And I really appreciate her talking with us because I do believe that hearing other people's stories helps us feel so much less alone. So listen for Heidi sharing how getting involved in volunteering and advocacy related to her husband's disease has helped her in her grief. And also how writing fiction has helped too. And that was an interesting one for me. I know I've written a memoir, and I know other people who have grief experiences sometimes write memoirs, and I haven't heard as much about people writing fiction. So that was an interesting discussion as well. So before we jump into my discussion with Heidi, and speaking of books, I wanted to let you guys know some news from here. So first of all, this Saturday, April 29th, if you're listening right now as this comes out in 2023, this Saturday is Independent Bookstore Day. And so this is a nationwide celebration of indie bookstores all across the country. This year, I am going to be celebrating the most exciting new indie bookstore, which is called Zibby's Bookshop, and it's in Santa Monica, California. If you're in California, I encourage you to stop by. Well, if you're anywhere near Santa Monica, that is. I know California is obviously a very large state. But if you're in the LA area, consider stopping by. And if you're not, actually, they've got my book in stock there, and you can order it online, as well as tons of other books. You can search on their website. It's zibbysbookshop.com, and she actually is publishing now some interesting memoir and fiction. And actually, I know some of the authors who are publishing books coming up with her. Some of them are grief related. So I encourage you to follow along Zibby Books and Zibby's Bookshop, because there's going to be some good stuff coming out from there. But anyway, for Independent Bookstore Day, I encourage you to sign on to their website and pick out something you'd like to read. And also stop by an indie bookstore in your own community and pick out something, and be sure to post it on social media and hashtag it to celebrate independent bookstores. And then the other thing, this is really a book week, it turns out. It's also National Library Week. So I encourage you to get a library card if you don't have one. Pull it out of wherever it is if you do have one. And if you're looking for my book, you actually can find it in the library. I set up a link at jennylisk.com/libraries, which will take you directly to the listing for Future Widow on WorldCat. And WorldCat is a website. It's the world's largest library catalog. So you can actually go in there and see if Future Widow is available in your library. It is in quite a few. If you're in King County, Washington, or Seattle Public Library, of course, you can just go straight to their websites. But if you're somewhere else, check out jennylisk.com/libraries, and you can find if it's available in a library near you, and if not, you can request it. Okay, so that's all the news from here. Let's get on with the show. Support for this podcast comes from BetterHelp. You can talk with a licensed professional therapist online, anytime, anywhere. Visit betterhelp.com/widowedparent to learn more and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/widowedparent. I hope you'll check it out. My guest today is Heidi Carson. Heidi divides her time between tech startup product management and rare disease advocacy with Team Telomere. She got involved with Team Telomere through her husband, Chad, who passed away in 2019 due to complications resulting from a bone marrow transplant attempting to address his telomere disease. She's a mother of 2 busy teens, and her hobbies include fiction writing, yoga, running, traveling, and learning languages. Heidi's joining us today from the San Francisco Bay Area in California. Heidi, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much, Jenny. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, I've been looking forward to this. For one thing, shall I say, from one former tech person to another tech person, it's great to be, connecting. And it's kind of funny sometimes to be straddling, the grief world and the tech world. And I don't know if I spent 20 years at a large tech company. So maybe we're kindred spirits or something in the, although I wasn't working for a startup though.
Yeah, my whole career has basically been in startups. I've just really enjoyed jumping in at the early stage and helping out in all the different ways that startups need help.
Yeah. Well, that sounds exciting. And of course, we're here today talking not because of any of that, but because we both share
something else. Right?
Yes, the unfortunate circumstance of being widowed at a young age and being widowed parents of teenagers and all of those things. So, I'm sorry you need to be here, and thank you for being here.
Well, yeah, thank you so much for having me. And it feels like the same thing I say to my Team Telomere colleagues, which is they're all lovely, lovely people, and I wish we didn't know each other.
Yeah, exactly. All right, well, let's just jump right in here, if you don't mind. And why don't we start out by just backing way up before everything changed? Kind of tell us a little bit about what was normal like for you and your family before things changed.
Yeah, we had a really nice, normal life. My husband and I were both working in tech, and we had 2 little kids. And my husband knew for some time, basically since the time my son was born, that he had issues with his liver. He had gotten a life insurance policy, and as part of that, they did some blood tests that returned some abnormal liver results. But it was really nothing that affected his life in any major way. He was getting checked up every 6 months or so. Often he needed to go in. He was being monitored. He was taking care of himself. He felt fine. He felt great. We were traveling, and we knew that maybe one day his liver might deteriorate, but it seemed like it was doing well, and we didn't really think about it all that much. So yeah, it was just the normal busy life of 2 working parents and 2 young children, and life was really quite good.
And you were in the Bay Area also at that time?
Yes. Yep. We were working here, and just having a really nice life here.
Yeah, great. Okay, so now I'm sensing the other shoe is going to drop. So tell us what happened.
Yeah. So it all really came to a head at the end of 2017. We went for a hike, and my husband said, "Oh boy, I feel like really exhausted, much more exhausted than he should have felt." And we didn't really think too much about it, but at his next doctor appointment a few weeks later, he mentioned it to the doctor, and the doctor said, this was the liver doctor, might as well get your blood checked. And the blood numbers came back with what they call pancytopenia. Every single blood number was through the floor. And what was that all about? Because that isn't really something that would be associated with the liver disease. It felt like something different. So at that point, they checked him into the hospital for a week just to run every test under the sun to figure out what is going on with this person's blood counts. And at the end, they did a bone marrow biopsy, which revealed the underlying problem, which was what they call myelodysplastic syndrome. It's an issue in the bone marrow. So then we were left with this quandary of how is somebody who has this mysterious liver problem, which we didn't know the cause of, how is this person also now having this mysterious bone marrow problem? It's 2 major issues in the same person, same otherwise healthy 46-year-old person who had no reason to have these 2 problems.
And they're not things that are normally connected, like people with liver disease usually have bone marrow problems or vice versa or something.
Not normally, not that we knew of at the time. And the doctors as well were really perplexed. They had no explanation for this. So now the sort of background liver disease, which was we were aware of and it was just kind of going along, now became acute. right? Because with this bone marrow failure, this is cancer. And so we had to go see a hematologist. And I remember the first words out of his mouth were, without treatment, you have 7 weeks to live.
Wow.
And so it
7
went
weeks.
from chronic to acute. I don't know where he came up with the 7 weeks, but that number sticks in my head.
Yeah. Well, anyway, a very short amount.
Yes. And that was the beginning of 2018. So about February 2018.
Okay. Wow. Okay. And so they said without treatment, he had a very short time left. So did they offer some treatment options then, or like, how did you proceed?
Yeah, the treatment option was chemotherapy. And so we started that right away. And then our whole life turned from just kind of treating this liver issue in the background to Chad's in therapy, and he's in chemo let me think what the regimen was. I think every month he had to go in for 5 days of chemo. And then there was oral chemo that he had to do at home, pills he had to take, and then monitoring his blood counts. And of course, being the engineer that he was, he created a giant spreadsheet of all of his counts and all of his medical records and how he was feeling and what he was eating. He had to uptake his intake of protein, and he was tracking all of that. And so all of a sudden our life just revolved around him and that spreadsheet and trips to the cancer center and getting chemo, and everything else kind of fell by the wayside at that point. Plus also we knew that this chemo was not curative. This was just life prolonging, and it was just a way to keep him alive until we could find a better solution for him. We knew the only curative solution for the liver would be a liver transplant, and the only curative solution for the bone marrow would be a bone marrow transplant. But how do you give a liver transplant to someone who has cancer of the blood? And how do you give a bone marrow transplant to someone with a failing liver?
Oh, yeah.
That became our catch-22.
Yeah, I can imagine that would be, I mean, I think I don't know a whole lot about transplants, but what I know is that they're scarce and they have criteria. And I'm guessing you were probably running into those criteria and a bunch of no's.
Yes, exactly. Because livers are really rare and precious. There are not enough to go around, and they want to give them to the people who have the greatest chance of survival. They want to give them to the healthiest sick people they can. And Chad was a healthy sick person until the bone marrow failure. And now we had to figure out a way to untangle this knot and break through and find a way to thread the needle to get him both the liver transplant and the bone marrow transplant. So it took some time to kind of figure this out. We went on this epic odyssey around the country and literally around the world, trying to talk to different doctors who might have had any experience with this, any ideas for how we could do this. And long story short, we ended up in Korea, where we were able to get him the liver transplant. And I actually served as his living liver donor. And
really?
The reason I became his living liver donor was that we were told in this country they didn't want to kind of waste a deceased donor liver on somebody who was otherwise very ill. So we had to find somebody who would be willing to give their liver to Chad. And we ended up in Korea because his liver doctor here in the Bay Area himself was Korean and knew that the techniques in Korea were very advanced for living liver donor donation. So at the end of 2018, so about 10 months later, we went through the procedure and I donated the right lobe of my liver to my husband.
Wow. I didn't know that was possible. I've heard of living donor transplants of some types of things. Especially
the liver is this incredible organ. I have such respect for it. We should all love our livers. If we could hug our livers, we would. The liver is responsible for so many different things that we don't really give it credit for, and it has this amazing regenerative capability. So if you do donate half your liver, the other half will grow back to accommodate whatever demands your body puts on it. And so I was told that within a few months of that donation of surgery, that the rest of my liver then compensated to do whatever it needs to do for me.
Wow, that's incredible.
Yeah, it's amazing.
Okay, so now how old were your kids at this time?
let's see, that was 2018. So they would have been 13 and 15.
Okay. Yeah, so those can be tricky ages. Well, I guess all ages can be tricky for different reasons. I wonder, you were probably in Korea for a while, and it sounds like you were traveling around the US quite a bit.
Yeah.
How did the kids come with you, or how did all that work out?
Yeah, we had a lot of discussions around that because we knew we were going to have to be at these remote locations for months at a time. And we were debating, are we going to bring the kids with us, enroll them in school? How's that all going to work? What's happening to the rest of our life while we're busy trying to keep Chad alive? And ultimately, what we did was the kids stayed here the whole time. They were just in their normal school, but we had this rotation of relatives coming to live in our house and serve as their parents. So Chad's aunt came, Chad's sister came, Chad's cousin came. The bulk of it, though, was really done by Chad's parents. They essentially moved into our house and served as our kids' parents and did the carpool and took them wherever they needed to go and signed the forms and just basically served as substitute parents while we were gone for months at a time. So we were super fortunate that they were in a position to be able to do that. And that gave us a lot of comfort as well, knowing that the people that we loved and trusted were there taking care of our kids and in a way that we couldn't.
Yeah. That's terrific. It also sounds difficult. And I suppose
it was difficult.
I suppose it depends a lot on the kids and their ages and their personalities and whatever they do or don't struggle with. But I can imagine that, there's that emotional component too of, I'm being taken. I know I found this, right? Like I had a lot of help. I didn't travel anywhere, but I had a lot of help with the logistics of taking care of my kids. And what I wish I had known to do was, even if somebody was carpooling them or bringing food or whatever they were doing, like I still needed to check in on the emotional part. I think it would have set us up better
really
long term. Yeah.
It was really hard. I guess the good thing was my kids are a little bit older. And so I was able to text with them, email them. Chad also bought this crazy device, this robot that is finding a technology solution to everything that lived in our house. And we could get onto the robot and drive the robot around the house and just kind of pull up to the dinner table and sit with them while they were eating and kind of just try to be part of their lives. That was his idea to do that. And that it was interesting. It was really trying to find a way to be present in their lives, even when we were thousands of miles away.
That's cool. I haven't heard of that. Was it like a video screen or something? So like
it had a little video screen, right. And you could maneuver it from remotely so that we could, drive it around the house and follow them and move into the different rooms remotely.
Pull up to the table at dinner and then you're on the screen next to the table there in the robot. Huh.
Yep. I think we played Sorry with them one time too. That way.
Nice. Yeah. Huh. Clever. Yeah. So tech solutions to problems. Somehow I'm thinking of Rosie the robot in the Jetsons.
It was very much like that. That I think was a precursor to this invention.
Yeah. Fun. Okay. So, and by the way, maybe we should pause here because you're talking about liver and bone marrow. How does this telomere thing? Well, what is that, first of all, and how does that fit into the picture?
Right. That's a good question. So we were really perplexed. How could this healthy person have two major underlying issues? I mean, even to have one underlying issue, really, we had no explanation for, but much less two. So it took some time, and people didn't really recognize this because telomere biology disorders are really not well known. And as evidenced by the fact that we went to all these top hospitals around the country, and really nobody had any explanation for what the underlying cause could be until we eventually talked to one doctor who mentioned this idea to us. And then, of course, we started researching telomere biology disorders, and it's typically seen as a childhood kind of disorder. And so here's Chad at age 46. He didn't really fit the classical symptoms, and it's often manifests itself in different skin issues, things like patterns of coloration on the skin and fingernail dystrophy, or sort of fingernail malformations, which he didn't have. So he didn't really fit the typical picture of it, and we didn't think that that was it, but we had no other reason for it. So the test for this, the kind of clinical diagnostic test, is to get your telomere length measured. So telomeres are the little protective end caps at the ends of our chromosomes, and they get shorter over one person's lifetime, which is normal and natural, but they can also become critically short for various reasons. It could be genetic reasons, it could be other reasons. And when they become critically short, it's like the little plastic bit at the end of a shoelace. If it gets shorter, it falls off. The shoelace essentially frazzles, and that's what essentially you can imagine happening to a chromosome. And so that can lead to all kinds of different disorders. And now that I've gotten involved with this, I now know the clinical manifestations are exactly that. It's often bone marrow failure, liver failure, and often pulmonary fibrosis. Depending on when it's diagnosed and what stage in one person's lifetime. And now I know it is also not exclusively a childhood disease. It can manifest really at any point in any person's lifetime. And I'm seeing in the community of people that I'm now working with, I see 2 and 4 year olds needing bone marrow transplants, and I'm seeing 60 and 70 year olds needing lung transplants. So it can manifest in a lot of different ways. I really think it's an unrecognized, underdiagnosed kind of condition, because it's not the first thing you think about. And it can manifest in so many different ways that it may not be something that you recognize if a person simply has one liver issue or one bone marrow issue. You may not recognize that it's part of a larger sort of constellation of problems.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Thank you this wasn't a word that I had heard of before we started talking. So thank you for educating us on that. Okay. So you went to Korea, you did the liver transplant, but I mean, the reason we're talking today is because ultimately it ends badly. So Tell us what happened.
Well, the liver transplant did not go as smoothly as we had hoped. There were a lot of complications, but the good news is Chad did recover, but his health had taken quite a hit from that. And because he was in the hospital for so long, his muscles had atrophied. He had to relearn to walk again. He was doing a lot of physical therapy. He also had to relearn to swallow again. And swallowing is such a basic function. We don't even think about it. We swallow all day long without even paying attention to it. But if you lose the muscle strength in your throat and in your esophagus to be able to swallow, life gets really, really complicated when you want to eat again. And so he was learning to eat again, learning to do all of the things that one normally does, just get up and walk around was a challenge for him. And we did actually come back from Korea, and we were all extremely happy, because that was hurdle number one. That was the major hurdle, right? Get him a clean liver, get him a nice liver. And after he came back, I remember the doctor here saying, "You have one of the healthiest livers I've ever seen." So, his liver was in fantastic shape, but we were then struggling with, okay, now challenge number 2. Now he has a healthy liver. We need to get him a bone marrow transplant. And while he was in Korea not getting chemo, the cancer, the leukemia in his blood had started getting worse, because he couldn't be on chemo treatment while he was recovering from the liver transplant. But we knew, okay, we go through a couple of rounds of chemo, we're going to get him a bone marrow transplant. And then my thought at that point was, he's going to be in terrible shape, but he's going to have the rest of his life to recover. And even if it's a slow recovery, I'm sure he can do it. So he had been through so much at that point, but he was in pretty bad shape at that point. But I thought, if we get him the bone marrow transplant, he can recover, he can take his time, and we'll have fixed these 2 insurmountable problems that nobody had any idea how we'd ever be able to tackle. So so we went to do the bone marrow transplant, and the donor for that was actually his cousin's son. So kind of like a nephew, essentially, a young guy who had amazing bone marrow and was a match for Chad. So we were able to get that done, and that was fantastic. But it never really worked. So after a bone marrow transplant, you're kind of waiting for your blood count numbers to recover. And with Chad, they just kind of never got better. Essentially, the new bone marrow is supposed to come in and displace the old bone marrow and take over the factory of producing all your blood cells. And at that point, it just really wasn't happening for Chad. And we were just waiting every day. They measure the numbers every day, and they're supposed to start getting better, and they just kind of never did. And over a period of about a month or two, I mean, he was in the hospital this whole time. He was in a hospital bed, just getting weaker every day, because it's not exactly like you're bouncing around the hospital waiting for your blood counts to get better. He was tired all the time. He was starting to get really lethargic and not responsive. And he just essentially deteriorated. He started communicating and saying things that really didn't make sense. He had, I mean, there's delirium from being in the hospital, but Chad's biggest property basically was his brain. And he was such a smart guy and a well-spoken person. He read a lot. And to see this person who had been so engaged in the world, even when his body was failing, to see his brain failing now was probably one of the saddest things I had to observe. And the good thing about it, though, I would say for the last couple weeks of his life, he was really not communicative anymore and really had no idea what was going on. And then the hematologist came to me and said, you know, we've tried everything at this point, and the leukemia came back, and there's nothing more we can do. And so at that point, I had to make all the decisions for him. And I do have to say, I feel a sense of gratitude that I didn't have to go to him and tell him that. And I mean, I did tell him that, but I don't know that he understood me because he wasn't responsive. And I said, Chad, you know, this is it. We're going to have to, we came so far. I mean, it felt like we'd come to the 1 yard line. We got him the liver transplant. We got him the bone marrow transplant.
Against all odds.
Against all odds, we got there, and we just couldn't cross the finish line at the end. So
wow.
I just spent the last few days with him, just sitting with him in his bed and holding his hand, talking to him. I invited all of our friends and family to call his phone and leave a voicemail and just tell them what they thought. And I played those voicemails for him over and over again. And
that's a good idea.
Yeah, that was a really nice thing. I'm so appreciative of the friends who did that. I saved those voicemails too. I have them now. I can replay them whenever I want to hear them. But it was just people saying how much they appreciated knowing him and the ripple effect of whatever he had done in their life. And I just had the sense of his legacy continuing with all these folks. And at that point, we were in Pennsylvania. This was at the hospital of the University of Pennsylvania. So I really felt like here I am in a city. I don't really know anybody here that well. And actually, Chad had a cousin or has a cousin living in Philadelphia. So that was really, really nice to be there with her. And in fact, she provided a lot of comfort, but she's one person. My whole community was here in the Bay Area. So just getting a lot of support remotely and kind of helping Chad through the last few days of his life. And at that point, I had really no idea how long things were going to last. But within a few days, I actually was in the hotel that we were staying at. It was about 6 a.m. I got a call from the nurse saying he had passed. So that was how it came to an end for him.
Yeah. Wow. Well, thank you for telling us about that. And you know, one thought I had, it strikes me, you're mentioning the messages, the voicemails, and that you've been able to save them. It strikes me that those could be an interesting, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, way for your kids over time to come to know more about their father. Yeah.
Yeah, we really tried to give as much messaging or save as much messaging as we could. So in the beginning of Chad's illness, sort of in the spring of 2018, when we first got the diagnosis, we actually did this program through UCSF where a videographer came to our house and filmed Chad for about 2 hours talking about his life. And I forget the name of the program, but it had been started by somebody whose father wanted to do that, film himself talking about his life at the end of his life. And we didn't know at that point. We were still very hopeful. Maybe this isn't the end of Chad's life. We thought we would still be able to get through it, but we thought, why not do this program? Because at least we have it all saved. We have it all saved in case anything happens.
Sure.
And so he spent a lot of time. The videographer asked him a lot of questions, kind of an interview like this. Tell me about your childhood. Tell me about what it was like living where you did, when you did, going to school, anything about your job, your friends, your family, anything you want to tell us. And she had some nice prompts for him. And at the end, he gave us all messages. He gave us all, 2, 3, 4-minute messages, one for me, one for his sister, one for his parents, and one for each of our 2 children. And so I have those all saved. And actually, I took the messages for our 2 children and I transcribed them and combined them with photos into one of those books that I self-published for the kids. Really, just,
nice.
Just one copy for me and one copy for the kids. And so I made kind of a little photo album and saved out just photos of them with their dad and scanned in little cards they had made him, or anything just between the 2 kids that had been accumulating over the years. I put them all into this little book that I created. And at the end, I pasted in the transcript of their dad's message to them so that they could just have that.
Idea. Yeah.
And I made it kind of small too, because I figured, they're not going to want to have a big old coffee table book that they haul around with them. Although I could have filled a whole coffee table book, but I made it just like a little booklet that they could take with them and keep with them for the rest of their lives and just refer to and remind themselves of the great times they did have with their dad.
Yeah, that's a great idea. Was it like a Shutterfly book or something? I
think I did it through Barnes and Noble, but very similar. There are a lot of services out there where you can do that kind of thing now.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I might steal that idea.
Yeah.
Cool. Okay. Well, and so by the way, how old then were your kids when their dad died?
And when he passed. So I think it was about 14 and 16 at that point.
Gotcha. Okay. So thank you for going through that. And I'm curious, those first few months, weeks, months, after your husband died, like, I'm curious, what was the hardest, or kind of how did that unfold, particularly from the point of view of trying to, you're grieving, you're parenting grieving kids, like, any reflections on that early period?
Yeah. So for us, because we had been going through this long struggle, I have to say, it wasn't really a surprise when he passed at the end. We knew that all along this could happen. We knew that this was actually the most likely outcome. We were really just trying to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat the whole time. And as a result, for me, during that time of racing around the world, trying to find a solution for him, knowing that the chemo was going to stop working at some point, I felt in those 20 months or so, I felt like I was banging a hammer against my head every day. Like, every day was such a struggle. Like, what's going to happen today? Are we going to end up in the ER tonight because his blood counts dropped? It was such a lack of control and a lack of agency that I had no control over the situation. So when he did pass, it felt like I stopped banging that hammer against my head. It felt like, wow, all I have to do now is take care of myself and my 2 kids. That is so easy compared to these last 20 months. I don't have to go anywhere. I don't have to do anything. I just have to keep ourselves alive. That's all I have to do. And it felt like a relief in that way. And we had been through so much, and I've been reading about anticipatory grief, right? So for those 20 months, I was facing already the fact that, one day I might be a widow. One day he may not be around. One day, who knows what might happen. So in contrast with people who maybe lose their spouse suddenly, I had a lot of preparatory work for that moment. And so when I was able to kind of let go of everything and come back home, I just felt like I can do this. I certainly I can do this. I know I can do this. I did much harder things for 20 months. Now all I have to do is just be me and just be happy. If I can be happy, if I can find happiness, I just have to refine some happiness for myself and for my kids. For my kids, speaking of what they had been through, I think for them, because their dad and I had been gone for so long, they didn't really observe his deterioration. They just saw him being gone, and then he's not coming back. And they had a lot of time to adjust to that. And so it was really interesting, because a lot of people at the time were saying, oh, you should put your kids in therapy. You should make sure that they're talking to people. You should people are giving this advice, and I know it all came from a place of goodness. And I really thought, let's try this. And actually, during the time that he was ill, the hospital recommended some therapists for the kids, and I took them. And my kids came back and said, I talked to these people and they're very nice, but I don't really know why I'm talking to them. I don't know what I'm supposed to say to them. I don't really understand why we're doing this. And I don't really want to go back. That's what they told me. And so I thought, well, I can't really then sort of force you to go because maybe I think you need it or know that you need it. I just let them take the lead and decided that if they need therapy at some point, and if they come to me, or if I think they need therapy, or if something comes up where I think, it'd be really good for you to talk to somebody, therapy will be there. And there are a lot of really great therapy solutions out there. I'm aware of BetterHelp because I actually went through them myself, but there are a lot of opportunities for people to get help nowadays. And I'm really grateful that people recognize that needing therapy or going to therapy is something that we can all really benefit from no matter what we're going through. And the availability of it it's there. So I just decided I'm going to take advantage of it when and if I need it. And I'm not going to make my kids go if they feel like they're not getting anything out of it, or if they don't understand why they would need to go.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's interesting. It's tricky because therapy, it seems to me, is the kind of thing where, like, if you don't want to be there, you're probably not going to get anything out of it. Even if you do, even if someone makes you go, right? Like,
yeah.
Like if you, because it's not like, I don't know, some kind of physical treatment. Like if you break your arm and they put a cast on your arm, then it will heal, even if you want it to, you don't want it to, whatever. Like you don't have to emotionally engage in the process in order to make that treatment work, right? Yeah. But with therapy, it seems to me, if you're not, invested in the process, then you could sit there and chit chat all day or not talk, or talk about less important issues and never get to the more important issues because you don't want to, right? And then it's tricky.
I know it is tricky. I don't know the right answer, but I think with the kids, I think you just have to pay attention, listen, really focus on them. When I'm talking to my kids, I really try to take everything else out of my mind and focus on what they're telling me and try to listen to the subtext of what they're telling me and be present for them. And I really think just being present for them and putting my whole self into hearing what they're saying is the best gift I can give them. And if that turns into needing therapy at some point, great, let's do it. And if it doesn't, that's great too. Let's just do what they think they need and what I think they need.
Yeah. So, and one of the things you've obviously gotten involved now in, I believe it's called Team Telomere, which is some kind of advocacy and research to try to make a difference on this condition.
Yeah, exactly. So we are all people who are ourselves affected by it, or have a family member who is affected by it, by this disease, and really just trying to raise awareness. The fact that we went to ourselves, so many different doctors around the world who really had no awareness of this, says that we need to continue to raise awareness for it. Right now, I think there are probably 17 identified genes that can result in shortened telomeres. And one of the things I worked on this past year with my colleagues in the organization was putting together an updated set of clinical guidelines that go through all the different parts of the body that can be affected by telomere biology disorders and what the treatment options are. I even helped to co-write a chapter about traveling for treatment, because a lot of people will have to travel for treatment because there aren't that. Chances are your local hospital isn't going to be super up to speed on a disease this rare. And so I really felt like everything I'm doing is contributing to an opportunity for people to be more aware of this disease. And also, I don't want anyone else to have to go through what we went through. I want people to have solutions and have resources and have options that weren't available when Chad and I were trying to go through this. And so one is raising awareness, two is improving treatments, and ultimately one day I would love to see a cure. There are potentially curative therapies that are being investigated now, and this week there's a big hematological conference in New Orleans that I think probably all the hematologists in the world are going to, and that I think is a great opportunity for people to share their knowledge and understand what we can do, because this is something that it can be so devastating to people. And if you are like us, happily going along in your lives, all of a sudden this thing kind of falls into your life. You have no idea what the resources available to you are. And so that is my goal in getting involved, is to raise the awareness and work towards finding a curative treatment one day.
Yeah, that's terrific. And this is reminding me a little bit. I recall in the book Option B, which was co-written by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant. Adam Grant says something about if you are working on doing good in someone's memory, your loved one's memory, it's kind of like you're extending their legacy in a way. I don't remember what the exact quote was, but something to that effect. And I wonder if you found this, is maybe helpful in your grief process or in finding your meaning going forward, or how kind of this volunteer involvement kind of plays into your life in a broader picture.
Yeah, absolutely. I absolutely feel that same way, that I'm carrying Chad's legacy forward. And he essentially died for this information that I now have, the experiences that I have with traveling around, and my own personal experiences of just what he went through, watching his body deteriorate in the different ways, seeing what worked, seeing what didn't work. And I really feel compelled to bring that knowledge forward and deepen my own understanding. And if we lost him for something, we need to do something to continue his legacy and make it worthwhile, and make it worth all of the struggle and the pain that we went through. So it's really been helpful for my healing, and connecting with other folks that like I mentioned earlier, I never would have wanted to meet these people, but they're all wonderful, and we work together so well, and I love my interactions with them, and they're all part of the healing process for me. So I'm so grateful for the opportunity to be part of this. And so, yeah, I feel like I need to continue doing this to support myself and to support all the good work that Chad would have done if he could be here with us.
Yeah, that's terrific. I'm curious whether you think it's something that your kids might get involved in someday, or maybe they have been already. Is this I wonder, sometimes these things become family, projects or something. Do you think they'll have any interest in that?
I think potentially they might. Right now, I think they're kind of focused on finishing up their finals, but at some point when they have a little more space in their minds for it, I think absolutely they could.
Yeah. Cool. Gosh, we could probably talk about all these things all day long. I'm thinking of a few other topics though that I wanted to hit. I noticed somewhere that you've been writing some fiction. Which strikes me as interesting because I talk to a lot of people who have been widowed or who have been, some grief in some way, right, from different losses, who are interested in writing memoirs. And you're writing fiction. And so I wonder, can you tell us a little bit about that? And is that part of your healing process, or is that just a total diversion, or how does that fit in?
Yeah, that's something I had been thinking about for a long time. I probably have started 3 or 4 novels over my lifetime and never really knew how to bring them to completion. And even the one that I am working on right now, I started it with Chad. And I remember at one point he told me, "Oh, I can't wait to read it when it's finished." And so, yeah, I didn't finish it until this year. So unfortunately, he didn't get to read it. But what I find when I write fiction is that I can really control the story, and I love that. And I love that I can make happy endings. I can make bad things happen. I feel like I can bring in my experiences from my life, and certainly anyone who reads this book and who knows me will recognize all kinds of different pieces of my life that I've just stitched together in an unusual way that doesn't reflect reality at all, but is just sort of a product of my imagination, things I've read, things I've experienced. And I found it very cathartic to be able to just create this world and drop these characters into it and make life a little miserable for them, but give them a happy ending. And it's just been really fun for me to explore that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, cool. That sounds fun. I've never written a fiction book. Maybe I will someday. We'll see. I don't know.
Yeah.
Right now, I've got too many nonfiction books in the queue. No, but that sounds neat. Another thing I was thinking of, I'm curious if you, a lot of widowed people, especially younger widowed people, our ages, people with kids in grade school and high school, tend to, sometimes are alone. They don't know any other widowed people, maybe in their neighborhood or school community or personal circles. And I wonder if you've managed to meet other widowed people, or maybe online, or like if you've been able to find any support, and if you have any thoughts on the potential helpfulness of that.
Yeah, it is challenging. And in my circle of friends, I have one friend who is a widow. I think her husband passed away about 10 or 15 years ago, but we're kind of rare. And a lot of places where I go, I see these intact families, and I do feel a sense of, I was like that once, and I'm not like that anymore. But I have a lot of other really good things in my life to celebrate too. I think for me, one resource that I found really helpful was a group called Club WID, which it used to be called the Hot Young Widows Club, but now we call it Club WID. And it's really for kind of, I would say, younger thinking, younger focused kinds of widows. And because the first support group I did go to after my husband passed away, I was the youngest one there. And I did feel a sense of, we're just in different phases in our life. And I knew I had to continue to live for my kids. It was amazing to come home from Philadelphia and just immerse myself back into my kids' lives that I hadn't been part of for a couple of months at that point, and just really, really engage with them. But it's a different place than somebody who is in their 70s or 80s becoming a widow. So Club WID was a place where I found my friends, my cohort. And I find it's kind of a discussion board. And I find that sometimes I dip in and read, and I don't say anything. I just read what other people are going through and basically nod my head to every one of the posts, because I've been through that. I completely relate to the things that people are talking about there. Sometimes I share an anecdote from my life. Sometimes I post something. Sometimes I just put a smile or a thumbs up because I agree with that sentiment. That's been really helpful. There are also some really nice widow folks on Instagram who post about their widowhood, and same thing. I read those comments and I nod my head and say, I agree. Everything you're going through with your kids and your loss is something that I relate to. So I find those resources really helpful, even though those folks are all scattered around the world. I feel through my phone, I feel a sense of connection to them.
Terrific. Okay. Well,
and a reminder that, what I'm experiencing, I'm not the only one going through it. We're all going through very similar shared experiences.
Right. Yeah. And it's one of the reasons I appreciate people like you coming on here and sharing your story too, right? Because I think that hearing people talk about their journeys and their stories helps people feel less alone as well. Even if particulars might be a little different, there's so many things in common that I think we can, whether it's learn from or whether it's just feeling a little bit of a comfort, I guess, of not being alone. Yeah, it
is really easy to feel isolated. And if you are the only one in your circle of friends who's been through something like this, and other folks around you don't really know how to cope, or they're saying things that they think are helpful, and they may be helpful, but they maybe don't know what to say or do. And so being in a circle of people who are like you, it's just really validating.
Yeah. Okay, well, thank you for sharing about that, and we'll put the link in the show notes to Club WID as well if people want to look for that. All right, well, I think we are just about out of time today, so I'd like to ask you one last question, if you don't mind. I'd like to ask all my guests if you could say one thing to newly widowed parents, what would it be?
I had an opportunity to do this just recently on LinkedIn. I came across the posting of somebody. I don't even know who this person is. I think he lives in the UK, and his wife had just passed away, and posted all these beautiful photos of her and their child. And I said, I don't know you, but I have to say, having been through this, and now it's been about 3 years for me, you think that it's not going to get better, and it really feels like it won't. And then somehow, miraculously, over time, you find the things that are going to help you get to better, and some new form of normal that you didn't expect. So that would be my guidance to folks, is just do the things that bring you joy and focus on those, and allow time to do what it does, which is to heal. And it's not linear. That's the other thing too. Grief is a convoluted process, and you think you're making progress and things are better, and then you have a setback. But allow yourself to have those setbacks, and don't place any expectations on yourself, but just realize that over time it will somehow get better.
Mm-hmm. All right. Terrific. Well, I think that's a great place to end. So my guest today is Heidi Carson. Heidi, where can listeners find Team Telomere if they're interested in finding out more about that organization and potentially getting involved?
Absolutely. Online at teamtelomere.org, and also all the social media outlets as well.
Awesome. All right. Well, we'll put that in the show notes, and it's Team Telomere.
Correct.
Okay, great. All right. Well, Heidi, thank you so much for speaking with me today.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Jenny. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed my interview with Heidi Carson as much as I did. You can find show notes and all the links at widowedparentpodcast.com. Look for episode 136. And if you're finding the Widowed Parent Podcast helpful, please consider supporting the show. It's easy. Just go to buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. That's buymeacoffee.com/widowedparent. As always, thank you for listening. And until next week, remember, you've got this.
Thank you for listening to the Widowed Parent Podcast with your host, Jenny Lisk. Connect with us on social media and at widowedparentpodcast.com.